Okay, hello and welcome everyone to this Vision Zero and Road Safety in Canada webinar. My name is Robert Mansell, and this webinar was organized by CARSP's Young Professional Committee in collaboration with IT Toronto, and it is being hosted by CARSP. So we have a great lineup and apparently record registration. We are so grateful to all of our presenters for participating in this event. We have a pretty packed schedule, so we'll get right into it. We wanted to remind everyone of CARS's webinar on Monday, October 20th on automated speed enforcement. It's free for CARSP and IT members, 50 for non-members. Now, since this is a joint webinar hosted in part by the CARSP's Young Professional Committee, we wanted to spend a few minutes discussing who we are and some of the activities that we do. So, this is our executive team. Our executive team is comprised of representatives from both academia and industry, and it's also multidisciplinary. So our vice chair is actually going to be making a presentation later in this webinar. And our executive team is supported by the regional coordinators, and I, as well as Cameron, are regional coordinators for the Toronto area. And just to give a little background about how the YPC came about, in 2007, there was the first global youth assembly, and it was recognized that youths are disproportionately affected by road traffic crashes. And because of this, they should have a seat at the table. So from this assembly, the Youth Declaration for Road Safety was produced, and Transport Canada actually funded some Canadians to attend. And when they returned, they formed the National Youth Road Safety Working Group, and that later evolved into the CARS Young Professionals Committee that we have today. In 2009, there was the first global ministerial conference, and this was a high-level global meeting dedicated to road safety, and it urged national action. And this paved the way for the UN, the United Nations Decade of Action for Road Safety, the first decade of action which aimed to stabilize and reduce global road deaths. And youth networks were able to expand advocacy, and awareness during this time. And from 2015 and 2020, we had the second and third global ministerial conferences, as well as the second Youth Assembly, which further integrated youth perspectives into policy discussions. And the second Youth Assembly actually launched the Global Youth Coalition for Road Safety. And in 2021 marked the start of the second decade of action, with a goal to halve road deaths and injuries globally by 2030. About halfway into this second decade of action, we had the fourth Global Ministerial Conference and third Global Youth Assembly that focused on accelerating progress towards the 2030 targets. And delegates from the YPC attended this event with funding from both CARSP and Parachute Canada. So that's a little bit of the history there. So about us, our mission and goal really focuses on generating awareness for road safety issues in Canada and for advocating for evidence-based policy and establishing a national network of young road safety professionals in Canada. Just to give you a brief run through of some of the things that we've done, in 2019, we introduced the poster competition at the CARSP annual conference. And then we joined the Global Youth Coalition for Road Safety, introduced a social media director position and a travel award at the conference. We reduced conference fees and introduced a regional coordinator role, as well as hosted YPC social events. And importantly, we launched a mentorship program, which kind of connects young road safety professionals with experienced road safety practitioners. And this is a pretty popular initiative. And in 2005, as mentioned, we attended the Global Ministerial Conference, where we were able to engage with Transportation Canada decision makers. So just a few pictures of some of our events. We can see some poster competitions and networking events shown here, as well as some professional development events. And so I think we have some pictures of some mentors as well. And this is the third World Youth Assembly. And we can see that we have representatives from the YPC, as mentioned. Our chair is shown in a yellow hoodie here. And at the fourth Global Ministerial Conference, YPC actually had the opportunity to engage directly with senior level decision makers. This included the Associate Deputy Minister of Transport Canada. And our engagement at the Global Ministerial Conference actually led to a closed door meeting at the recent CARS conference with two Transport Canada decision makers. So that brings us to the end of our presentations. Cameron and I, as I mentioned, are the regional coordinators who organized this event in collaboration with CARSP and ITE. And the goal of regional coordinators of the Young Professional Committee is to expand membership and to also coordinate events such as this one. So if there are any people or any persons in the audience who are interested in joining the YPC, collaborating with the YPC, or even volunteering to be mentors to young road safety professionals, please contact us at the email shown, and this email is also available on our website. And now I'll hand it over to Cameron, who will moderate the remainder of the webinar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron, and as Robert mentioned, I'm also a regional coordinator for the City of Toronto, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I want to introduce our first speaker, Shada Sanayinejad. She's the manager of Vision Zero projects for the City of Toronto, and she'll be giving an overview of Vision Zero as well as Vision Zero practices in the City of Toronto. So please, Shada, whenever you have the chance, share your screen.
All right. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we could see your screen.
Perfect. All right. Thanks for that introduction. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Shada Sanayinejad, manager of Vision Zero projects at the City of Toronto. And when I was asked to prepare something for this webinar, I was told to target it towards the audience who may not be in the field of road safety. And as I was thinking about that, I felt that the very first point I should make as a part of this webinar is that if you're in the field of transportation, you are in the field of road safety, whether you know it or not, or whether you're focusing it on it today. But hopefully by the end of this session, we have convinced you that you're in the field of road safety, whether you're in ITS, traffic signal timing, you're designing roads, you're doing development reviews, you're helping sort of various government levels make policy decisions or decisions around where funding should go on active transportation or transit. That all impacts road safety in a quite direct way. So I'm going to spend the next couple of slides taking us back and talking about what is Vision Zero and what is the safe system approach. If you already know that, my apologies, but again, I'm trying to sort of target it towards folks who may not have had that exposure yet. So the visual in front of you is trying to compare what we call the traditional approach to road safety and the Vision Zero approach. So I want to highlight some of the major differences. The very first one is that Vision Zero approach believes that fatalities and serious injuries are preventable. That's why we don't call them accidents, because accidents are not preventable. Whereas the traditional approach sort of saw them as a fact of life, operating and sort of designing a transportation network. The second piece is that the Vision Zero approach acknowledges that the human error happens, but that those errors shouldn't cost anybody their life or major life-altering injuries. Whereas the traditional approach, sort of, many of you might have seen that famous visual of that Venn diagram that shows 95% of the crashes are caused by human error, and then we just put our hands up and say, well, if it's human error, there's nothing we can do about it. That is not the takeaway from that. Human error is one of the contributing factors to many crashes. The collision types that the Vision Zero approach looks at are serious injuries and fatalities, because we know that those have the greatest cost to individuals, their families, and the society, whereas the traditional approach sort of treated all collisions equally. Responsibility is shared under the Vision Zero approach between, yes, road users, but arguably much more so on those of us who are involved in sort of regulating, designing, operating, making policies, enforcing the roadways in any way. And then lastly, the traditional approach, if it was being data driven, it looks at just historical clashes, where have things happened in the past, and sort of playing a game of whack-a-mole, going after those locations. Whereas the Vision Zero approach is a truly proactive approach, where you try to predict where crashes might be happening based on sort of modeling and understanding what contributes to fatalities and serious injuries. So that takes us to the safe system approach. And safe system is about looking at road safety from multiple angles and identifying evidence-based measures that might fall into one or more of any of these sort of 6 slices of the pie that you see in the visual. And those are safe land use planning, safe speeds, safe road users, safe vehicles, and safe road design. And acknowledging that any of these components on their own have their flaws and have their gaps, but it is in overlapping all of these components that we build redundancy into the system and make sure that they cover each other's gaps and ultimately make it impossible for a fatality or a serious injury to happen. So another way of looking at that is this visual I borrowed from City of Guelph's Vision Zero plan, which sort of conveys the Swiss cheese model, that any layers of safe system, any layers of the Swiss cheese might have its flaws, but it isn't overlapping those that we make sure a fatality or serious injury doesn't happen. So what are we doing in the City of Toronto? Lots. Very busy visual. I apologize, and I don't expect you to read everything here, but there's 3 points I want to make in the remainder of the time that I have. And the first one is that what we in the City of Toronto think is going to take us to get to zero of the Vision Zero is not just identifying, countermeasures, but it is in applying them across the network systemically, widely, accelerating them, coming up with ways of applying them more efficiently. So also the visual in front of you shows how all the different sort of programs and initiatives we've added over the years and never subtracted, but also the increased funding that has been going towards Vision Zero in order to accelerate those existing programs based on what we understand is working and what isn't working, and tweaking what isn't working. So an example of that is raised intersections. Many of us know what they are: raised crosswalks and intersections. It's one thing to, look at a given project, whether it's an intersection in a corridor, and say, okay, we should have raised intersections and work through getting that into the design. But the next level and achieving Vision Zero is about doing the behind the scenes not so pretty work of developing the standards that are needed, the training that is needed, the decision making about where should raised intersections go. Let's decide that at the outset, so that every time we touch a road with a reconstruction, we're not going back to the back and forth about should we do this, should we not do it, is it worth the money, how do we do it, what design should we apply. So it's building in efficiencies, and it's like painful work at the beginning for long-term gains, of course. The second point I want to make on something that City of Toronto is doing is around safe vehicles, mainly because safe vehicles aren't often talked about. Many of us know the challenges with which large trucks, especially when it comes to urban environments, when it comes to road safety. So large trucks, obviously the kinetic energy of a crash with a large truck can do significant damage, especially to an unprotected human body that is a pedestrian or a person on a bicycle. The second sort of challenge with large trucks is inherently the driver has very large blind spots. So not only could the vehicle not do more damage, it's easier to do that damage because the driver can't always see the road users around them. And then lastly, because they have limited maneuverability, as road designers, we have found that we have to design pretty forgiving roadways if we're trying to account for their turns. But as a result, the other 95% of the vehicles that are passenger vehicles using a typical, urban intersection are going through an intersection that is over-designed for them, which means they're going through it at higher speeds. So there are different ways we could address that through road design guidelines. But I wanted to put a visual of the newer model of the City of Toronto's garbage trucks, which I find one of the most beautiful images that I've seen over the past year, because it shows a truck that has a cab over engine. That means the engine of the truck in front of the driver isn't blocking their view of what might be in front of them. It has lots of direct vision windows, both below at the door behind the driver, so when they're turning around to check their blind spots, they can see. What you can't see is 360 cameras and driver assistant features within the cab, and then obviously a side guard on the side that City of Toronto has made standard for all of our trucks, and are working on figuring out how to do that for contracted trucks. So lots that could be done on the safe vehicle side of the safe system that might be outside of what road design and the traditional sort of field of transportation might cover. And then the last point I want to make is around safe land use planning. Again, because it's not one that is often talked about, but is probably one of the most fundamental ways of addressing the sort of road safety issue in urban environments. And it is in avoiding building stroads in the first place. And if you're not familiar with the concept of stroads, it is basically these roads that we have all over our country and North America that is a mix of a street and a road. It has a mixed identity, and we've decided that it should serve as both, but ultimately it cannot function as both, and it is resulting in a lot of fatalities and serious injuries when people try to cross these roads, as well as the sort of challenges for people inside vehicles when they're using these roadways and using that two-way left turn lane to make access plazas and whatnot. So there's lots that we have done and we could do with the City of Toronto. We've looked at where are these types of crashes happening in these mid-block crossings. We've looked at where are they most problematic, where's the greatest risk along our network, and then looked at adding crossing opportunities at these locations where we have mid-block transit stops. But in reality, going back to that very first point I made around, if you're in any of these fields in transportation, you're in the field of road safety. If you're in affordable housing, if you are thinking about transit-oriented communities, if you are involved in incentivizing active transportation in any way, if you're involved in building more and better transit and convincing elected officials that that's where the funding should go as opposed to building more freeways, you are in the field of road safety, because it is with these more fundamental ways that we could avoid building stroads in the first place, rather than trying to retrofit and address and minimize the risk now that we have built many of them in the city. So there's my sort of call to action as I wrap up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shada. In the interest of saving time, we'll be answering questions at the end of the three presentations. So please put your questions in the Q&A and we will get to as many of them as possible after the presentations. So our next speaker will be Liraz Friedman, who's a road safety supervisor in the city of Guelph. She's also the president of CARS, and she'll be discussing the Vision Zero action plan in the city of Guelph. So thank you, Liraz.
Cameron, can you see my slides?
Yes, I can see your slides.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for having me. I wanted to preface this with a few things. One, I was actually on maternity leave when our Vision Zero action plan was developed. So this is the great work of our team, mainly Nico Koenig and Reza Minghafori, who did a lot of the data analyst work. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Shada and the City of Toronto's Vision Zero team, because a lot of what we've been doing over time has been lessons learned from people who have been in the game for a lot longer than we have. And so you'll see a lot of the same sort of flavor in my presentation as well. So I wanted to start off by orienting you all to Guelph. The City of Toronto may be a little bit more well known, but the City of Guelph roughly right now is a population of around 150,000 people. And much like any other sort of urban center or downtown, you get a lot of congestion, you get a lot of people walking, and sometimes that inevitably ends up looking like a risky road. I wanted to start off by looking at the timeline of road safety in Guelph. And if you were at TAC earlier this week, this might be a little bit of a repeat for you. So feel free to kind of take a breather. But this is what road safety has looked like over time before we officially became a Vision Zero city. So back in 1998, we had our first, what was called our neighborhood traffic management policy. And to Shada's point earlier about whack-a-mole, it was really this idea of looking at networks and the neighborhood as a whole, so that you didn't implement something on one street only to create a problem on another. It is actually most recently in coming into 2026 going to be adapted, and it's now been reframed as our traffic calming policy. In 2002, we established our Active and Safe Routes to School Committee, and this becomes important because a lot of the Vision Zero work that we do is about collaboration. So although it's about transportation safety specialists and others working together within the city, it's also about cross collaboration with other groups like police and public health. And so we've been doing that for a number of decades now. In 2004, we established our Adult School Crossing Guard program. And then in the later years, we started to develop more programs programs and policies mainly related around speed, and that's why I have that graphic shown there on the right. In 2016, we established what we called our Guelph Road Safety Coalition, which is now our Vision Zero committee. And again, the idea here was around collaborating with others. So the groups involved in that are people from public health, the Ministry of Transportation, our Indigenous advisor and coordinator within the city of Guelph, as well as some other equity and active transportation groups. In 2020, we had our precursor to our Vision Zero action plan. So we called this our community road safety strategy. And it's what I call Vision Zero Light. So it was essentially before people became really comfortable with the idea of Vision Zero kind of on paper, but it had a lot of the same strategies embedded that essentially no loss of life was acceptable on our roads. In 2021, we started with our first automated program and installed 6 red light cameras across the city, 1 per ward. And then in 2022 and 2023, we started really putting in that focus on speed. So we started by reducing all of our residential neighborhoods to 40 kilometers an hour. And then in 2023, we launched our first automated speed enforcement cameras. So we started with 4, and we've expanded that program to 12 in 2025. In 2024, we launched our Vision Zero dashboard, and I would encourage you all to go to guelph.ca/Vision Zero if you want to take a look at it. But essentially what we were trying to do is we were trying to get away from that static way of reporting, mainly because the media would pick up on things like most collisions happen on Fridays at 5 p.m. when it's sunny, rather than looking at some of the more important trends and how that related to features within the built environment. And so we wanted a more transparent and dynamic way to share some of that information, and so we decided to put it all online. And then finally, earlier this year, March of 2025, we launched our official Vision Zero Guelph action plan. So even though we adopted Vision Zero in 2022, it took us a couple of years to sort of outline what that plan looked like. And so today I'll be talking about the development of that plan, but we haven't really gotten to the full implementation side yet. That's kind of what's coming next. So Shada already shared what sort of the safe systems approach looks like. And in Guelph, we decided to take elements of that, but display them as this safe systems pyramid. So this idea originally came from David Ederer in the States. And the idea was that we wanted to embed all of those different pillars, things like safe speeds and safe road users, but look at them from implementation that was most effective to ones that take greater individual effort. So if you look at the bottom of that pyramid there, you'll see, for instance, the social economic factors. Those are some of the pieces that Shada sort of alluded to, looking at affordable housing near transit, looking at things like zoning reform that reduces vehicle dependency. So ultimately what we're looking at here is reducing our exposure to that risk. As you get closer to that top of the pyramid around sort of manual measures or education, it's not that these things are not important. They're still part of the pyramid, but they're perhaps sort of a smaller piece of the pie. So they're supplemental rather than focusing on any one of those initiatives alone. The main strengths of our Vision Zero action plan for safe streets are that they're plain language. So we really use this as a communications tool. You don't have to be a transportation professional in order to sort of understand the action items that are embedded within our plan. And we emphasize data, equity, public health, and risk. And I'll get a little bit into how we do that in the next couple of slides. All in all, we sort of encapsulated this all into 68 Vision Zero action items, which we'll be working towards the implementation of over the next 5 years. And we developed a high-risk network, again, similar to what the City of Toronto has done, to look at our areas of focus and how we wanted to embed some of those implementations moving forward. So this study, if you're familiar with kind of the transportation sector, has been done time and time again. But essentially, it's just looking at equity across any given city. So here in Guelph, we use the Ontario Marginalization Index, and that base math is looking at marginality in three different sectors. So the lowest 33%, meaning the most affluent people within the city, and the highest 33% are that darkest orange, being the highest equity deserving communities. We overlaid some information on there, including pedestrian and cyclist motor vehicle collisions, as we know those are the most vulnerable and end up with the most severe type of injuries. And then on top of that, we mapped traffic studies, and we use this as a proxy for engagement. And often we know that people who live in more affluent areas are maybe more familiar with how to engage civically and with government. And therefore, we sort of zoned in on what could we do in areas where there was an equity deserving community. In other words, there was a need. There was also a lot of collisions, but we weren't hearing from the community. And that brought us to an engagement opportunity called the Guelph Walkshop, which we did in partnership with Parachute Canada back in 2023. And essentially, what we did here is we walked around the neighborhood and we talked about safe mobility. So, this wasn't an opportunity to really necessarily highlight all the great things we were doing. We did talk about a lot of the interventions that we had put in over time, but it was an opportunity to get people that worked in the city along with folks from public health and the community all together to talk about different concerns that they were having. Things like unsafe mid-block crossings when it came to transit stops, things like rails, things like speed when it came to automated enforcement around school zones. And essentially, we walked and talked, and a lot of the participants felt that it was a very helpful opportunity to essentially get out of the everyday way of thinking about this using data and really get onto the ground to discuss some of the issues that we were seeing. So if that was kind of the equity component of our action plan, the other focus was risk. And so I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of how this was designed, because again, that credit goes to our data analyst, Reza. But essentially, he used some factors to identify the roads with the highest risk of collision causing injury. These looked like historical collision data, average daily pedestrian, cyclist, and vehicle volume, as well as average vehicle speed. He also looked at the percentage of the population over the age of 65 and the percentage of low-income population as some of those equity variables. What we ended up finding was that 83% of all of our serious injuries and fatalities happened on only 10% of Guelph's roads. And really, that gives us a major area to focus on that uses both data and equity to help inform how we're going to allocate some of those resources in a more proactive way moving forward. Overall, how we incorporated this into our action plan is that we were going to incorporate the high-risk network specifically into our capital plan prioritization. And we're also going to host public engagement events with residents who live near these networks. So again, I described kind of one version of that, which looks like a walk shop. It may not always take that format, but that's an option that we're thinking about moving forward. We also plan on performing road safety audits within these high-risk networks and expanding our community safety zones beyond our school zones to align with these high-risk areas. Finally, in terms of evaluation, which is another big component of our action plan, we look at the number of safety improvements installed each year on this high-risk network, as well as the percent change that we're seeing in vehicle speeds along that same network. So I wanted to just give you a very quick snapshot. If you go onto that guelph.ca/Vision Zero page, you'll see something called our Safe Streets map. And this is really a great visual representation of all of those different Vision Zero components. Things like leading pedestrian intervals, red light cameras, automated enforcement cameras, traffic calming. And it gives us a tool to engage with residents when they're asking for something on their street to kind of see how these different resources are sort of allocated across the board. I also mentioned this, that we look at our collision data in a more transparent and dynamic way. So we do that through Power BI, and we try to relate a lot of this information, like the societal costs, some of those Vision Zero emphasis areas, and relate that back to road safety countermeasures that people are seeing implemented over time. So what does that look like in relation to how many speed enforcement cameras we're seeing, leading pedestrian intervals, things like that? So I sort of mentioned that we're only kind of in the beginning stages of the implementation plan. So we are looking at our data to look at, for instance, how can we protect vulnerable road users at intersections? And so we have this one action plan. We have 8 focus areas. And over the course of the next 5 years, we're going to be working towards our plan of implementing those 68 action items, all to support people reducing their severe and fatal injuries on our roads. Thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Lira. Our final presentation will be by Mariam Hassanpour, who's an associate of transportation and safety at 30 Forensic Engineering. She'll be discussing some road safety research on conflict analysis.
Thank you, Cameron, for the introduction.
No worries.
So hello, everyone. So my name is Mariam, as Cameron mentioned, And today I'm going to talk about one of the studies that I have done during my PhD back at Toronto Metropolitan University using the data from MyoVision cameras. And I think this is a great combination of 3 different presentations, and you can see how these 3 going to relate to each other. So I'm going to keep it short as the other presenter did, and put it into the 4 sections: introductions and summary of the data, the methodology I use, and for sure the results of this study. So as Shada mentioned, one of the aspects of road safety is being proactive. And in order to be able to be proactive, we need to estimate collisions and crashes before they actually happen. And the method to do that is by relying on surrogate safety assessments. So my main focus of this study is based on surrogate safety assessments. And within the literature of the current surrogate safety assessments, there was 2 main gaps, I would say. First of all, the literature using very complicated and complex methods in this context. And second of all, there was a few research focusing on pedestrian safety and pedestrian collision and crashes in this approach. That's how I ended up aiming to be able to predict pedestrian crashes using what are traffic conflicts. Traffic conflicts are observable situations in which 2 or more road users approach each other in a way that there might be a risk of collision if they continue in the same approach and in the same direction or in the same speed. We can capture conflicts, or also known as safety critical events, near misses, all different terms for the same thing. We can capture that by microsimulation, videos, and also LiDARs. And here you can see one of the example of the traffic conflict captured by video between pedestrian crossing the crosswalk and a left turning vehicle. So I used 5 different cities in Canada. Each of them had different number of intersections. So I got the data from all these intersections. And at the end, I had 44 intersections. I captured the collision data as well as the conflict data for these intersections. So traffic conflicts that I captured for these pedestrian data included T2 value, which is kind of modified time to collision, and also conflict speed for the vehicle. So let's see how we have done this study. Let's start from the left side here. Let's start from here. So on this side, I had number of pedestrian crashes for 5 cities for those intersections that I mentioned in the last slide from 2017 to 2022. And then I determined the number of pedestrian collision for each intersections. And now let's jump to the right side of this diagram. And on the other hand, I had vehicle to pedestrian conflicts for the same cities, for the same intersections, for 24 hours of video data or 1 day of video data. And then before determining the number of conflicts in each of those intersections, I used machine learning methods to kind of compress and integrate all different safety indicators associated with each of those pedestrian conflicts. So I had a better way to kind of sort out these conflicts based on the severity level. So what I did here was to use that machine learning to be able to categorize traffic conflicts into different severity levels. And these red dots shows the highest severity levels categorized by this approach in my data. So instead of using the all conflicts that was captured by camera, I excluded those that I believe that are regular conflicts, are kind of too safe to be considered for predicting crashes. I kind of completely exclude those from my models and used only those that I believe that, and based on the result of this model, we believe that it's more dangerous and more risky. And then I determined number of conflicts on those high severity levels for each intersections that enabled us to be relating these extreme conflicts or severe conflicts to number of collisions for each intersection. So in order to relate these collision to crashes, we concluded let's use one of the simplest statistical and well-known methods to be more practical. So we use mixed effect GLM model, fixed effect GLM model, as well as linear regression model, both mixed and fixed effect. And at the end, by comparing the accuracy of the results, we ended up knowing that mixed effect linear regression model outperformed the rest of the model in order to relate traffic conflicts to traffic collision. And now I'm going to present the result of mixed effect linear regression models that was used to relate collision to conflicts. And within this type of model, I tried different combination of independent variables. For example, for one model, I use extreme conflicts per day with anomaly score more than 1, which is one of those severity categories that I introduced with using that machine learning method in a previous slides. And also I use different other combination like only left turn high severity conflicts, or portion of conflicts happen at night, or portion of left turn conflicts. I consider different type of independent variables, but at the end, model number 4, which only considered one intercept and extreme conflicts per day with anomaly score more than 1, which was one of those severity categories, outperformed the rest. So a short summary of my study would be in answering these 3 questions. First of all, let's see whether the machine learning integration methods that I use was able to enhance the accuracy of relationship between traffic conflicts and collision. And the short answer for that is yes. When we included all conflicts that happen in intersection, the relationship between crashes and conflicts was poor. So in another way, we cannot use all the conflicts that has been captured by a camera to be able to estimate pedestrian crashes. Let's look at the second question that we answered through this study. Are there other contributing factors that improve the accuracy of the crash-conflict relationship? Yes, as I mentioned, there were different independent variables that we considered, and 2 variables showed promising. First of all, the proportion of conflict occurring at night, and also the proportion of conflicts that were left turn divided by the total. And the last conclusion of this result would be the fact that spatial heterogeneity affects the relationship between conflicts and crashes. So I had in my study 5 different cities, all in Canada, but each of those cities have different relationship associated with crash and conflict. So this means that when we are using a same model from different city to another city, we might need to kind of calibrate that model because each city has their own relationship, and that has been established by using mixed effect model in our study. So, and lastly, I would like to thank the co-author of this paper, Craig Milligan, Robert Manser, who is present in this meeting, and also my supervisor, Dr. Prasad, and the financial support that was provided to us by NSERC and City of Toronto, and also the data that was provided to us by Microtraffic, and now part of my vision. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mariam. Now we could move on to the questions. There's actually a couple for you, Mariam, so I'll ask you yours first. Although you mentioned it during your presentation, do you want to give some more context into what an anomaly score is and what it means?
Yeah, for sure. I really try to stay within the time minutes interval. So I can completely understand if I missed mentioning some of the important terms. So anomaly score in a short term is a way that shows the severity of traffic conflicts within that machine learning method. So what this machine learning method use is that we input different vectors of different indicators, for example, time to collision, post-encroachment time, delta V, or speed of any of the vehicles. And all these vectors can be compressed and integrated into one indicators. And that indicators called in this model that I use anomaly score, but it's simply just a compressed indicator kind of representing all those different input vectors that was considered for this analysis.
Thank you. Also, there's one question asking, how did you decide the severity of conflicts? Was it based on manual observation?
I would like a little bit more, context on that question.
I'm not sure exactly, but just I guess it's related to how you chose the level of severity on the conflicts.
Yeah, so the method that I use is autoencoder neural network. So it's an unsupervised machine learning. So before running and training the model, you don't know anything prior, whether which level will be your answer of the severity. So you don't know specifically which category to put your highest severity level, medium severity level, or low severity level. So it comes all from the data. Then you categorize that. And it was at some point, it was a back and forth procedure. So I consider different anomaly score, 1.5, 2, 1, 2.5, different combination of different levels of anomaly score, and just looked at the accuracy of my results to see which of these categories give me the best result in terms of being able to predict crashes. And then I use that specific category. But as the anomaly score increase, the severity of conflicts increase as well. So we know that those conflicts that have anomaly score 3 for sure have higher severity level than those that have anomaly score 1. We know that, but we don't know specifically where in this one between 1 to 3 range there will be line to categorize as, okay, this category is our answer. No, we don't know that, so we need to use data to kind of prove to us which of these categories would be our answer.
Thank you so much. There's to add on to the question, since it's data driven, does it highly depend on data that you have? Let's say a site has a low number of severe conflicts versus a site with a high number of severe conflicts. Do these models account for that?
Yeah, exactly. That's really great question. So what I concluded is that for each cities, I would consider traffic conflicts and train the model for that specific city separately. I'm not going to combine all the cities together and then run the model because of the exact same thing that you said. Because this model is based on data, it's data driven. So we should be sure how we introduce the data to the model. That's why I choose, for example, if I had 10 intersection in the city of Toronto, I use that 10 intersection to be able to train the model. And then if I had different city, I use them to train the model differently. But in short answer, yes, since it's data driven, it's highly depend on the data. So that's why we need crashes as our baseline to compare those results with. So the crashes that happen on the intersection can show us whether the results of our machine learning method are trustable or not. That's why I related at the second stage of my study those conflicts to the crashes, because we know for sure those collision happened there.
Thank you. Sorry. Now we could give Mariam a quick break. Perhaps Shada and Liraz, you could answer this question. if there are, one person's asking if there are any safety policies for parking lots, and if there are, what are they?
I know that the City of Toronto, we do have some requirements and guidelines around parking lots once it sort of reaches a certain number of spots, making sure there's setbacks from the property line, access for pedestrians within the lot. But ultimately, I think more could be done because they are quite problematic locations, especially when it comes to crashes with children. There's a lot of reversing is happening in parking lots, and also parents are a little less cautious, thinking that they're off the road. So a known sort of environment within the road network. And there's I'm happy to share the ones from the City of Toronto if anyone wants to email me.
Perfect. A lot of time. Yeah, we still have a lot of time. Mariam, would you like to answer this question as well? What method did you use to decide to exclude less risky conflicts from your data?
Yeah, so the method that I used was the machine learning method that I mentioned in my presentation called autoencoder neural network. I noticed that the same method was used in aviation safety. So how I ended up using that method for road safety? Was the fact that there was literature commenting on this method being useful on aviation safety to be able to spot risky conflicts on the air. So I said, why not using the same method for the road safety? Yeah, if you want more comment on that, this autoencoder neural network method is an unsupervised machine learning method or dimension reduction method that use different vectors. No matter how many vectors you gave to that, it will be trained based on those indicators and try to reconstruct those inputs as close as possible to more frequent sample size. So for our case, when we talked about traffic conflicts, most of the when we talk about traffic interaction, most of the traffic interaction are normal, and there is just a few traffic interaction that are abnormal. That's why this method works well for our data, because it will reconstruct the data based on the more normal sample examples. And then the reconstruction error for the normal event will be the least, and then the reconstruction error for abnormal events or interaction will be the most. And that's, in another term, the anomaly score. That's why what I mentioned, that anomaly score of 3 represent higher risk of conflicts and higher severity of conflicts, because that anomaly score actually means the risk and the difference between the reconstructed conflicts and trained sample with the true and actual sample of conflicts. That difference represented by term called anomaly score.
Thank you so much. Liraz, perhaps you could answer this one, and Shada could help you. Could you guys provide more detail on how you assess and identify higher risk roads in your network?
Sure, I can speak to this at a very high level. So in terms of the modeling aspect, again, I'll have to give credit to Reza Manghafori. He's our very talented data analyst, and he can speak more to the AHP model. There's actually a CARSP webinar specifically on the high risk network. If you want to go back and find that, if you want more details on it. But what I can explain, just generally speaking, is we know that speed is a major contributor when it comes to severe injury. And in the past, I sort of alluded to this through some of our equity work. A lot of the time, people that engage with city representatives are doing so because they know what that process looks like. And we all have a bit of a subjective perspective of what that risk looks like. I have 2 children. I know when I walk on roads outside with a stroller, it always feels like people are going a lot faster than they are. And so we wanted to develop a model to actually take into account what those risk factors might look like, so that when we're allocating allocating different types of interventions, things like traffic calming, a speed radar board, automated speed enforcement, et cetera. We're doing it in areas that are showing higher speeds, as an example. Potentially looking at higher exposure where people are crossing. So more peds, more people on bikes, and increasing risk from those perspectives. So we're going with sort of a more data-driven analytical approach rather than waiting for people to come to us, and using that to drive where our resources go.
Thank you so much, Liraz. Shada, I have a question for you. What is the city's plan for existing Stroads, as there are plenty of them?
There certainly are plenty of them. I quickly went through the slides on some of the work that we are doing in collaboration with the TTC on identifying one of the most sort of common reasons why people might be crossing Stroads, which is mid-block transit stops. So we developed a model recently looking at quantifying the relative risk associated with each segment of arterial and collector roadways when it comes to those mid-block crossings, and use that to overlap that against the 1,300 mid-block TTC stops that we have across the city, to pick the top 100, 200 locations that are most problematic, and then work closely with the TTC on looking at, is that a stop that they intend to keep? And if so, then looking at, can we justify adding a pedestrian crossing protection? In many cases, we can, and we're bringing reports forward for council to approve and to add those crossing protections. So that's one way of addressing it, identifying those long distances between protected crossings and making them shorter by adding crosswalks. But the other, there's not a lot, but other measures there to address, to reduce the risk by addressing speeding at those locations is topical, because we know that there's a lot of sort of vertical and horizontal deflection type traffic calming that cannot be applied to our arterial road networks, which is why things like automated speed enforcement are an effective tool to address and minimize the risk for those roadways, to both the risk of those collisions from happening when people are driving slower, they're better able to see what's happening around them, and the risk associated with the type of injury and the severity of injury. So having all the tools in the toolbox is certainly the way to get there.
And just to add on to that from another question, are new Stroads in inevitability, given that a lot of are driven by private commercial properties?
I wouldn't say that. Yes, private commercial properties are what ends up on the side of the road, but cities have a lot of power over zoning bylaws and how we define how we want investment to be made on properties next to the road. So I wouldn't say that they're inevitable.
And I could ask you another one right now. For raised crosswalk guidelines, could you comment on the guidelines on selecting where to install a raised crosswalk?
It comes down to understanding a lot of the times we are adding these where we're already planning on doing state of good repair work, road resurfacings, rehabilitations, and reconstructions. So those are all varying degrees of complexity and sort of based on how much we're touching the road. So that means the additional costs associated with adding a raised feature, which means you have to go down to the sort of the concrete base of the roadway in order to build up that race feature, increases. So on a road resurfacing, you have to pay a lot more to add the race feature. On a road reconstruction where the base is already being touched, the delta is very small. So the decisions are made based on a combination of that, the added cost, and our understanding of the relative risk that are at any locations based on both historical crashes and sort of the built environment. So it's more nuanced, and it's not, I think the question was asking, is it publicly available? It's not something that's sort of on our website, and it also changes as our focus changes, as funding increases or decreases, or how our decision making is done.
Perfect. I'm not sure if anyone could answer this one, just feel free to hop in. How can municipalities enhance their Vision Zero programs to align with SRS process by incorporating proactive risk and equity analysis? Perhaps either Liraz or you can answer this.
Yeah, I don't know, Rilas, feel free to jump in. I know Guelph is doing a lot of great work on sort of high risk and identifying their high risk network. We've done some work like that mid-block modeling that I mentioned, but looking at particular crash types or particular interventions and identifying where along the network those interventions would be most effective. I don't know if Laraz has anything to add.
No, I mean, we spoke a little bit about this in the earlier answer to the question, but much like Toronto, I mean, the intervention is very much related to the data that we see. And so I think what we're trying to do is recognize maybe that collision data isn't the only way to go. And looking at the fact that collision patterns are random, it can take upwards of 10 years to see any kind of trends there. And starting to think of some of these, let's call them surrogate measures that are going to show the potential for a collision happening. So of course, there's video conflict analysis and things like that, but those are, let's say, more on the expensive and timely side of things. So looking at, LiDAR systems, myovision cameras, just more of that proactive piece, I think is kind of where the direction is going. And then inevitably putting in, again, back to that equity component, really just thinking about that, putting in that data and looking at equity as more than one indicator. I think people think of socioeconomic status. That's like the first thing that comes to mind. But part of the reason I think Guelph is doing such great work in this space is because they're thinking about the other indicators and other pieces that can kind of be developed when it comes to redesigning a road. And part of that is the community engagement side, and understanding from people that live there all the time. Like, you can do all you want with the data, but until you sit with those communities and have a feel for what it feels like to be a pedestrian or a cyclist or a transit user on the ground, it's hard to know what the right intervention is for that particular community.
Thank you, Liraz. I think we'll do one or two more questions. How about this one? You could both answer as well. Have Toronto and Guelph started to build a new zoning plan to minimize the implementation of futurist roads and reconstruct existing ones?
I want to say yes. Could we do more? Probably. We have like strong sort of avenue plans in order to make sure we're building sort of mid-rise density with which will come roadways that are not roads. I don't have a fulsome answer for what those actions are.
Thank you. And yeah, if we could find one more. Shada, do you want to provide your suggestion for crosswalk setbacks from a Vision Zero perspective at intersections?
A suggestion for crosswalk setback at intersections?
The question is saying that they received mixed opinions on whether visibility is improved by bringing the crosswalk closer into the intersection versus providing a setback.
Yes. It's a common back and forth, and I would say that the answer depends. I have been a proponent of bringing crosswalks as close to the intersection as possible to improve that visibility, but I also acknowledge that where we're trying to introduce protected intersections, we actually do want that setback and that sort of minimum 5 meters or so for vehicles to turn and be able to sort of align themselves and their side sort of visibility to where cyclists and pedestrians might be coming from. So depending on the context, I could see an argument for both. So it's really location specific.
Thank you so much. And with that, I will end the questions. I believe some questions are still being answered by chat. So just now, I'd like to sincerely thank all the speakers. Thank you, Shada, Liraz, and Mariam for providing your time and your valuable insights. And I'd also like to thank everyone for attending. Also, we want to remind everyone of the CARSP webinar on Monday, October 20th on automated speed enforcement. And also there's a exit survey for the webinar. It's in the chat, but it'll also be given to you guys when you leave. And the recording will be posted on the CARSP website for anyone who's interested in reviewing or watching it again. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Oh, also,
Peter.
thank you, Cars, for helping us host this event.